Hello everyone, welcome to the Tim Booker channel. Wishing you a pleasant listening experience. Hello, today I'll be deciphering The Self for you. This book spans 368 pages, and I'll elucidate its essence for you. Western psychologists delve into defining, explaining, and discussing the self that influences our psychological states and behavioral patterns. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates once posed a question: who am I? Seemingly simple, this question has been hailed by later generations as one of the three ultimate philosophical propositions alongside, where do I come from? Where am I going? In reality, both reflect contemplation of the self. In modern psychology, self-study has become central. Various aspects like our personal social characteristics, self-awareness, self-evaluation, and more are now subject to exploration. Psychological studies on the self, to an extent, overcome the long-standing bias in self-perception. We often assume we should understand ourselves better than others, which isn't necessarily true. During self-assessment, we subconsciously attach subjective opinions. 70% believe their abilities exceed the average. 80% believe they have better emotional control than the average. 90% believe their moral standards surpass the average. Jonathan Brown's The Self serves as a guide to rectify cognitive biases and psychological timing. The book meticulously records the evolution of the self-concept over the years, emphasizing the value in psychological self-study. It offers compelling teaching materials and rigorous research methods, addressing a series of questions about individual traits, like why abilities differ among individuals. Reading this book lays a strong foundation for understanding and learning other fields within social psychology. The author, Jonathan Brown, is a psychology professor at the University of Washington. He obtained his doctoral degree from the University of California, Los Angeles in 1986 and has authored numerous self-related articles, earning the National Science Foundation's Outstanding Young Researcher Presidential Award. With the book's overview and the author's background covered, I'll now delve into its content across three main aspects. 1. The historical development of psychology and self-study. 2. Understanding oneself and behavioral adjustments after self-exploration. 3. Recognizing personal emotions, self-esteem, language, and psychological well-being. Alright, let's take a look at the first focus, the historical development of psychology and self-study. The academic definition of the self initially emerged in the 19th century when William James, the father of American psychology, divided the self into two aspects, the I and the me. The I represents the active perception and thinking within the self, while the me refers to the subject observed, thought about, or perceived within the self. In simpler terms, when we say, I want to eat an apple, it involves the I. However, when we say, he fell in love with me, the me refers to the aspect that can detach from subjective consciousness. These two distinct aspects of the self have seen substantial development in different scientific domains. Philosophers focus more on the nature of the I, seeking an understanding of the direct experience of the world within the self. Psychologists, on the other hand, are more concerned with the nature of the me. They concentrate on how people think and perceive themselves and how these thoughts and perceptions shape and influence other psychological aspects. Due to these differing emphases, self-psychology became isolated from other fields within psychology. Within these domains lies a field known as personality psychology. Self-psychology centers on subjective experiences, how people view themselves, while personality psychology leans towards objective experiences, how people actually are. Using the earlier examples, I think I am handsome clearly falls within the realm of self-psychology, while I am recognized as handsome aligns more with the essence of personality psychology. However, the study of the self hasn't always been a primary focus in psychology, which may sound surprising because isn't psychology about thoughts? In fact, it wasn't until the latter half of the 20th century that the self became an official subject of scientific and psychological research. In the early 20th century, a prominent psychologist emerged in the American psychological community, John Watson. Not related to Holmes, this Watson was the founder of behaviorism. Behaviorism dominated American psychology for 40 years, overshadowing everything else. Its core principles revolved around two hypotheses, empiricism and functionalism. Empiricism was a methodological belief stating that only specific phenomena observable and measurable by objective observers could be subjects of scientific study, thus ruling out the possibility of self-research. Functionalism, on the other hand, was a theory about mental traits, claiming that thoughts played no role in behavior. Instead, behavior was considered a simple stimulus, a function of the response chain. For instance, we eat because of the stimulus-response chain developed due to hunger, not because of subjective reasoning. Therefore, studying thoughts and the self seemed unnecessary. These core hypotheses conflicted significantly with the essence of self-research, leading to the suppression of self-study in psychology for a considerable and deep period. However, even during behaviorism's dominance, some theorists delved into self-study. Sociologists and many clinical psychologists advocated that thoughts and emotions related to the self should be significant subjects of psychological study. Certain experimental results also question behaviorism's analysis of behavior. One typical example is the hoop toss game, assuming your task is to toss a hoop onto a peg, and you have 10 attempts to practice, deciding the distance yourself. Say, on your first attempt, you hit 6 out of 10 hoops on a peg 3 feet away. What would you do next? If you're like most people, you'd probably aim for 7 hoops or try a farther distance. This behavior is hard to explain using behaviorism, as tossing a hoop is just a conditioned stimulus-response chain. In theory, repetition should lead to achieving the goal, yet most people don't settle directly. Human behavior isn't solely purposeful but driven by a desire for capability and experiencing pride. These developments re-established the self as an important field of psychological study and paved the way for contemporary self-psychology. Alright, now that we've covered the history of self-study, let's delve into today's second focus, understanding yourself and engaging in behavioral regulation after exploring the self. In psychological research, our attention is drawn more towards how individuals perceive themselves, known as the me. William James categorized the me into 3 types: the material self, the social self, and the spiritual self. The material self involves our bodies and possessions, the social self relates to the roles we play in society, and the spiritual self pertains to our mental states. However, unlike self-awareness, the self cannot be easily manipulated or understood. Most people struggle to accurately grasp it. Psychological studies indicate that individuals tend to hold optimistic attitudes about themselves in areas of high value, such as morality and ability. They often believe they are fairer, more prosperous, possess better personalities, drive better, and have more satisfactory relationships compared to others. People tend to describe themselves in more positive terms than others, showcasing a bias in self-perception, which is understandable. Our requirements for self-understanding primarily encompass self-enhancement, accuracy, and self-consistency. When seeking knowledge about oneself, we refer to 3 main sources of information: physical, social, and psychological factors. Undoubtedly, our subjective judgments play a decisive role when considering these factors, resulting in a strong positive bias in self-assessment. The formation of one's view of themselves has intrigued psychologists for a long time. Currently, the mainstream theories include Mead's symbolic interactionism, Piaget's cognitive development theory, and Erikson's psychosocial development theory in 8 stages. Though the primitive nature of self-development among these theories remains unclear, they all agree on how people's perceptions of themselves change with age. Self-descriptions across different age groups exhibit distinct age-related characteristics. In early childhood, descriptions are very concrete: I have curly hair, I have a brother, I like soccer, and so forth. By mid-childhood, self-descriptions become more socially oriented, using broader labels like, I like sports, I'm good-looking, and so on. During adolescence, focus shifts more towards internal psychological characteristics, with descriptions taking on emotional colors like, I'm hesitant, I'm an optimistic person. Self-perceptions also vary significantly across the timeline of personal development. Children tend to overrate themselves, with a slight decline in positive self-descriptions during adolescence, followed by a rebound in early adulthood. While youth is a period of considerable self-change, most individuals withstand these changes due to a strong sense of coherence. The same principle applies to the aging process: most people maintain positive self-concepts as they age. After understanding the nature of the self, behavioral regulation enters the life agenda. Effective behavioral regulation not only boosts mood but also amplifies productivity at work. In self-psychology, the self-regulation model motivating behavior revolves around what individuals choose to do and how they accomplish goals. The model consists of goal selection, action preparation, and the feedback loop of behavior control. Three elements primarily influence this process: self-efficacy, possible selves, and self-awareness. Self-efficacy refers to individuals' beliefs about whether their abilities can yield desired outcomes. High self-efficacy represents self-trust, while low self-efficacy implies doubt. We often witness extreme athletes achieving the seemingly impossible, not because of their physical prowess but due to their beliefs about themselves and their sport. When we hope for something, what we see isn't just the hope itself but also our future selves and our possible selves. People's views of their future also impact motivational behavior. Psychologist Marcus coined the term possible selves to represent this belief. Imagine an aspiring athlete dreaming of winning an Olympic gold medal. This is their possible self. They envision themselves on the podium, the anthem playing, and the cheers. However, negative possible selves lead to anxiety and fear of failure. Yet, these possible selves may also generate contradictory motivations, urging us to avoid certain behaviors continuously. Apart from possible selves, the varying degrees of self-attention also determine behavioral patterns. Duval and Wicklund initially proposed the role of self-awareness in behaviorism, stating that individuals highly focused on the self tend to compare their current state with relevant standards. Positive expectations fuel highly motivated, persistent, and efficient behavior when favorable, but act inversely when expectations are unfavorable. Excessive self-focus leads to a discrepancy between inner desires and reality, resulting in self-destructive behavior. This explains why many poets and authors choose suicide to end their lives. These factors roughly encompass the influences on behavioral regulation. However, in practical behavior, another essential motive or consequence is presenting oneself to others. Shakespeare once said, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players, they have their exits and their entrances." Throughout life, individuals play many roles, and this is where self-presentation comes into play. Common strategies for self-presentation include ingratiation, efforts to make others like you. Self-enhancement, demonstrating one's capabilities. Threat, portraying oneself as assertive. Exemplification, creating an impression of moral goodness and integrity. Supplication, convincing others of one's vulnerability. Self-presentation isn't a complete reveal of the self but an externalization of an idealized image. Successful self-presentation requires a balance between gains and credibility, where visibility is a vital factor influencing credibility. The more individuals can verify their actions, the more likely they are to present themselves in a manner consistent with reality. When faced with a setback in impression management, people employ various strategies, including explanations, excuses, or compensating for a negative impression by exaggerating positive qualities in another area. What seems false might indeed be true, and vice versa. This doesn't reflect deceit or misdirection but rather how individuals perceive themselves. People are often the audience of their own actions. Persuading others of possessing certain qualities usually ends up persuading oneself. Alright, that covers the influences on self-awareness and behavioral regulation. Let's take a look at today's final focus. Awareness of personal emotions, self-esteem, speech, and mental health are examined in the book. The author delves into the nature, origin, and impact of self-esteem. Although a common term in daily language, self-esteem lacks a universally agreed-upon definition in psychology. The emotional model of self-esteem suggests its formation in early life, characterized by two types of emotional experiences. The first originates from social interactions, termed as a sense of belonging. The second bears personalized traits and is termed as a sense of competence. These emotions primarily develop in early life, mostly as a result of mutual respect in parent-child relationships. Emphasizing early experiences for children doesn't mean self-esteem remains unchanged, rather, it lays the foundation, and subsequent psychological experiences affect it, although not as significantly as parent-child relationships. Self-esteem influences how individuals handle negative self-related feedback. Low self-esteem individuals feel shame and inadequacy in various aspects when facing such events. However, failures don't affect high self-esteem individuals similarly. They feel disappointment but accept it as a fact of deficiency in a specific aspect, not a denial of their overall qualities. Low self-esteem often leads to a protective approach, where individuals avoid risks, opting for less rewarding yet safer choices. In contrast, those with high self-esteem tend to seek self-enhancement, taking on adventurous challenges for potential greater returns. When self-esteem is too low, it can increase susceptibility to depression. Depression, a common psychological disorder, affects about 1/8 of people at some point in their lives. While for most, depressive feelings diminish within 6 to 9 months, in certain cases, it can persist for years. Experiencing depression once increases the likelihood of its recurrence. Most depression arises as a response to specific life events involving loss of love, security, identity, or self-worth sources, like losing a loved one, ending a significant relationship, or facing a major personal failure. During depression, individuals adopt a negative perspective of themselves, the world, and the future, selectively processing and focusing on negative self-information. These tendencies contribute to other depressive symptoms like sleep disturbances, loss of interest in daily activities, and feelings of hopelessness. Understanding oneself has long been considered a crucial factor for mental health. However, research suggests that many mentally healthy individuals don't fully perceive themselves accurately. In fact, they hold a more positive view of their qualities than reality, a cognitive bias known as positive illusion. Positive illusions are associated with increased happiness, more satisfying relationships, and more constructive and creative work. While beneficial, excessive positive illusions may have serious consequences, leading to negative interpersonal relationships, inappropriate persistence, poor self-regulation, and health hazards. Thus, moderation is essential for positive illusions to be effective. That pretty much sums up this session. We've covered an introduction to psychological research, historical exploration of self-study, and how behaviorism once dominated psychology, leading to a neglect of self-study for nearly 50 years. As behaviorism's influence waned, self-study regained psychologists' attention. We've examined the nature of the self and the general model of behavioral regulation. William James categorized the me into 3 types, while the nature of the self lacks a precise definition. Motivations for self-understanding include the needs for self-enhancement, accuracy, and self-consistency. However, most people's self-understanding tends to be inaccurate. We often describe ourselves using more positive terms, especially in high-value areas. Our perceptions of ourselves change as we age. We've summarized the general model of self-regulation and the 3 primary factors influencing its operation. We've also explored how processes related to the self interfere with self-regulation efforts in different contexts. Lack or excessive self-awareness can lead to self-regulation failures. We've discussed common strategies for self-presentation and the measures people take to shape their image during failure. What appears false may have elements of truth, and excessive self-presentation might ultimately lead to achieving one's idealized goals. Finally, we've touched on self-esteem and other self-emotions. Despite being a common term, self-esteem lacks a universally accepted definition in psychology. The emotional model suggests its formation in early life based on a sense of belonging and competence. Risk prediction and handling of failures differ significantly between low and high self-esteem individuals. Excessive negative emotions may also lead to depression. Understanding oneself accurately has been thought crucial for mental health. However, many mentally healthy individuals don't fully perceive themselves accurately, holding a more positive view of their qualities than reality. Positive illusions, though beneficial, must be moderate to be effective. That concludes today's summary. Congratulations on completing another book. Thank you for your support and attention. Subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with your friends. Let's combine wisdom and practice to achieve our financial goals and create a better future. Thank you all, and goodbye.